Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Martin, and I'm here to talk about a tragedy that shocked the world: the Rana Plaza building collapse in Dhaka, Bangladesh. This incident was not just a horrific event that resulted in a significant loss of life. It was a wake-up call that exposed severe flaws within the global fashion industry, particularly in how we manage supply chains and prioritize corporate responsibility. Today we'll explore the complexities of this case, examine who was responsible, delve into the underlying theories that explain why such disaster happened, and discuss the practical lessons that can be learned. I hope this presentation will not only inform you, but also inspire us all to think about the changes that need to be made in the global garment industry and beyond. Alright, introduction to the case. To understand the magnitude of the Rana Plaza disaster, we must first set the scene. On April 24th, 2013, the Rana Plaza building in Dhaka, Bangladesh collapsed, killing 1,129 people and injuring over 2,500 others. The 8-story building housed several garment factories that produced clothing for some of the world's largest brands, including Primark, Walmart, and Benetton. The collapse was sudden and catastrophic, with the building crumbling in less than 90 seconds. This scene was chaotic and heartbreaking. Workers, mostly young women, were trapped under tons of rubble. Rescuers worked tirelessly for days, digging through the debris with their bare hands to save those still alive. The tragedy highlighted the precarious conditions faced by the garment workers in Bangladesh, where safety regulations were often ignored in favor of profit. It also underscored the global disparity between the luxurious retail stores where these clothes were sold and the harsh realities of the factories where they were made. This wasn't just an unfortunate accident. It was a systematic failure where every link in the chain, from factory owners to multinational brands, played a role in creating the conditions that led to the disaster. To put this into perspective, imagine the day before the collapse. Visible cracks had formed in the building structure. Workers were initially evacuated, but factory owners, driven by pressure to meet production deadlines, ordered them to return to work the next day. When the building collapsed, it became a symbol of the dangerous and exploitative conditions often hidden behind the fashion industry's glamorous facade. Imagine for a moment these workers were making clothes that we all wear, working long hours for extremely low wages, often in dangerous conditions. How did we get to a point where a building collapse was seen as an acceptable risk in the pursuit of cheap fashion? This question is at the heart of the Rana Plaza tragedy. Summary of the case. To truly understand the Rana Plaza collapse, we need to examine the key players involved and their roles. Building owner Sohail Rana. The building owner bears significant responsibility. He illegally constructed additional floors on the building without proper permits, compromising its structural integrity. Despite engineers' warning of visible cracks in the building just a day before the collapse, Rana forced factory owners to keep their operations running. His actions epitomize reckless disregard for human life in favor of profit. Rana's behavior reflects a broader problem in countries like Bangladesh, where regulatory oversight is weak and often undermined by corruption. His decision to expand the building unlawfully and his insistence on continuing factory operations despite visible signs of danger directly contributed to the building's structural failure. Factory management. The management of the garment factories inside Rana Plaza were also deeply complicit. Despite knowing the building was unsafe, they ordered workers back to work, threatening them with wage cuts if they refused. This behavior reflects a toxic culture where profit was prioritized over human safety and workers' voices were silenced by fear of losing their livelihoods. Factory managers, driven by tight deadlines imposed by global brands, ignored safety warnings and forced their workers back into the building, demonstrating precarious imbalance of power between management and labor in the garment industry. The global clothing brands. The global brands that sourced from these factories are not innocent bystanders. Many of these brands were drawn to Bangladesh by its low production costs but failed to ensure that their supply chain meets basic safety standards. In many cases, these companies relied on third-party contractors, which allowed them to turn a blind eye to unsafe working conditions. The lack of direct oversight meant that they could claim ignorance of the conditions under which their clothes were produced. Though they were benefiting directly from this cheap labor, this disconnection between brand and factory creates a dangerous lack of accountability where the ultimate goal of minimizing costs overshadows worker safety and ethical considerations. Regulatory authorities. Local government officials and regulatory bodies failed in their duty to enforce safety standards. Corruption, bribery, and a lack of effective governance meant that the building was allowed to operate despite glaring safety violations. Inspections were either not conducted or superficial, allowing dangerous buildings like Rana Plaza to continue operating. This weak institutional environment in Bangladesh enabled unscrupulous practices and undermined any efforts to protect worker safety. These overlapping failures highlight that responsibility for the disaster cannot be pinned on a single person. It was a collective failure driven by negligence, corruption, and unrelenting focus on cost cutting that ultimately led to one of the deadliest industrial disasters in history. Theoretical underpinnings. The Rana Plaza tragedy is not just an isolated incident, it's a powerful example of broader issues in business ethics, corporate responsibility, and global supply chain management. Several key theories help us understand why this happened. Corporate Social Responsibility Theory, CSR. CSR emphasizes that companies have responsibilities that go beyond profit making, including the ethical treatment of workers, environmental stewardship, and contributing positively to society. The Rana Plaza collapse starkly reveals the failure of many brands to uphold these responsibilities. Companies were more focused on reducing costs than on ensuring safe working conditions. This case challenges business to rethink their CSR strategies, ensuring they are not merely symbolic but actively enforced at every level of the operation. The superficial implementation of CSR principles by some companies allowed unsafe practices to continue, revealing the need for a more authentic commitment to ethical standards. Stakeholder theory. According to the stakeholder theory, companies must consider the interest of all parties affected by their actions, not just their shareholders. The Rana Plaza disaster shows a complete disregard for workers, who were the most vulnerable stakeholders in this scenario. Brands, factory owners, regulators, and even consumers prioritize low costs and convenience over the safety and well-being of those who actually produce the goods. Stakeholder theory suggests that all these parties need to be held accountable and that the business must integrate the needs and rights of all stakeholders into their decision-making process. This theory underscores the importance of balancing the competing interests of all stakeholders, particularly those who are most at risk. Global supply chain ethics. The Rana Plaza collapse also highlights deep ethical flaws in the global supply chain. In many cases, brands have outsourced production to countries with less stringent regulations, allowing them to sidestep ethical concerns about working conditions and safety. The separation between brand and manufacturer creates a disconnect that fosters a lack of accountability. The tragedy calls for a reassessment of global supply chains, emphasizing the need for brands to take greater responsibility for the conditions under which their products are made. It also highlights the need for supply chain transparency and a stricter oversight to prevent such lapses in safety. Institutional theory. Institutional theory explores how formal and informal rules shape behavior within organizations in Bangladesh. Weak institutions and widespread corruption allowed unsafe practices to thrive. Regulatory bodies were either ineffective or complicit, failing to enforce building codes and the safety standards. The Rana Plaza collapse showed the dire need for stronger institutional frameworks, where rules are enforced and violations are met with significant consequences. Institutional reforms are necessary to ensure that safety standards are not only established but are consistently enforced. These theories provide a framework for understanding the systematic issues that contributed to the Rana Plaza disaster. They also offer pathways for how companies, governments, and societies can work to prevent similar tragedies in the future.